guys, and one of them is this one. And Matilda saw it this morning and said, "Oh, it's my favorite." So I want you to
describe what it is.
describe what it is.
So I believe it was coined by Nelson Mandela.
Yep.
But what it really means is if I look at you, if I dehumanize you, then I'm dehumanizing myself. So if I look into your eyes and I don't see myself in your eyes, then we are not really equal. That's kind of my definition of it. But I'm actually obsessed with this word, and it's actually part of my password for the last few years. So you guys know part of my password.
Can you say it?
Ubuntu.
Ubuntu. Yeah. So it's an African word. I use this book a lot with teams, and there's a lot of good quotes, but the one that I thought I'd share with you guys is very short, because really, when you guys come together, you're looking for ideas and resources, and it's always nice to get a $500 grant or something, but what you really counting on is people's energy and passion, right? And that's what got you out of bed this morning, was your own energy and passion. And he just says here, to engage another person in an authentic way releases the most powerful energy on the planet. So to engage another person in an authentic way releases the most powerful energy on the planet. So it really is, a lot of the work I do is around authentic leadership and being authentic, and I think in some ways the simple Johari window speaks to how can we be authentic with each other. Tell our truth, I can tell you my weaknesses, I can tell you what my concerns are, and I can hear back from you what you need from me or what you can be in growth. That releases real magic and authenticity. So when you're on teams, notice where there are places of real deep authenticity and the energy that you're getting from that, and then look around and start to notice what are the barriers to people really being authentic. So in some teams you're going to be a leader, in some teams you're going to be a follower or a team member. Okay, so it's important to know. So in terms of feedback, okay, in a lot of the organizations I work in, there's strong hierarchy. There's the senior vice president. There's an executive vice president. There's a senior vice president. And there's all these vice presidents, and then there's all these directors, and all these managers, and all these worker bees. I actually enjoy my work, but it's complex. And so in a hierarchy, one of the things that stop people is a belief that I can't give you feedback if you're my boss, right? Or I can't give you feedback because you're my peer, because it's really the boss's job to give you feedback, right? So those are beliefs. Just notice the beliefs that we have, they aren't the truth, or they aren't necessarily the truth, and that's true of most of our beliefs. They're just beliefs. So if you are a leader and people are not giving you feedback about your leadership, that's a hint that maybe you could ask. So we make it easier for other people at the end of the meeting when we say, is there anything, what could I have done different to make that a better experience? Or what's one thing I did well, and what's one thing I could have tweaked, even if it was something little, it makes it easy for people to say, oh, yeah. So create an invitation, because for whatever reason in our culture, giving feedback can be challenging. And we make it easy for other people when we say, I'm open, I'm eager, you will advocate for my success when you give me feedback. And you advocate for my failure when you don't. And again, positive or constructive, please give me some feedback. Okay? So, be sure to ask. Yes?
This is just kind of like adding to what you're saying. In my class, we were reading this article called Managing Your Boss, and it made the point that in every boss worker relationship, it is the boss's responsibility to do a certain amount of things, but a lot of it is the worker also giving feedback. And I think that you give the example of this one person who was the manager of a lot of people, and he didn't necessarily have the best leadership skills, but they matched him with people who were really good at managing the boss, and so they had a really, really effective team. And then when they brought in this new person, that was a worker that wasn't good at managing the boss, but had really effective results in the past, they had to take into account that his ability to manage the boss and give feedback wasn't the greatest, and that's when the team failed. So I think it's important to know that maybe not every leader is the greatest and has all the experience or like all those skills, but having like a team that is really able to communicate with the boss and like manage the boss.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can guarantee you for sure, every leader is not fabulous. Yeah, and they all have good intentions. Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of have a personal example of that. One thing that, so part of like the leadership structure of Joe and Kickoff is that with the co-directors, as the co-directors, we select a staff, which is like basically our leadership team. For all of the counselors, it's like 15 people, including 2 of us. And when we were talking to people for interviewing them for their staff positions, we just would sort of have general conversations about the organization last year and how we can improve on it. And quite a few people mentioned how people who were on staff last year mentioned how they didn't really think that they thought that they wished that the co-directors last year would have been more like open to their thoughts. And it wasn't that they were closed off to it. They just, the people on staff felt like they didn't have the opportunity to present that, I guess.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I've been trying to do this year is that any time that we have a staff meeting, we'll have it like on a Monday night. On Tuesday morning or Tuesday afternoon, I'll just like pick 2 people on staff and I'll like mix it up every time and I'll just text them and I'll say, hey, like, I'm just wondering, like, what did you think of the meeting last night? Like, what, like, you know, did we say anything that was not good, or, you know, could we make it better at all? And it's been, like, overwhelmingly positive feedback about that, because I've found that when you reach out to people like that as, you know, the, like, quote-unquote leader of the team, it really shows them that you are not trying to be authoritative at all, and that you're trying to, I guess, like you said, put out that invitation for improvement.
Yeah. Well, it's an authentic exchange, and it releases the energy that makes a difference. Right? Another strategy, at the end of the meeting, have people take a minute and write down one thing that really worked about the meeting and post it on that flip chart when you leave, and post one thing that would made the meeting better. Just one and one. And people will write something little, and then you get to do a scan. The whole feedback takes them 1 minute, takes you 2 minutes to read it, and you've got rich data. Oh, that's true. We did let that conversation get out of hand. And next time we need to, you know, real quick and dirty, but ask for feedback. Yeah. Great. It is a way you advocate for your success and for other people's success. So we're going to talk a little bit. We're switching gears a little bit to talk about powerful communication. Okay. Yeah. How many of you feel like you've got a pretty good role model for somebody who's a pretty powerful communicator? And without telling a story, if you have an adjective, just one word, what's one of the descriptors that you would use that you would say?
Confident.
They're confident. Great. What else?
Passionate.
Passionate.
Receptive.
Receptive.
Genuine.
Genuine.
Eye contact.
They have some eye contact.
Thoughtful.
Thoughtful. Thoughtful. Great. So powerful communicators are all those things. Okay. They know how to build a connection. Powerful communicators know the messages that they want to put out there, first of all. Okay. So knowing what your message is. Powerful communicators also have flexibility in how they want to get their message across. Okay. Great. So if you're sharing something with somebody in one way and all of a sudden you realize they're totally not getting it, you have an option. You can make it all about them and make them bad and wrong. Why can't they get it? Or, much more powerful, you can make it all about you and say, something about the way I'm describing this isn't working for this person, and I'm the person that can adjust. I can change how I describe this. Okay? When we give our power away to other people, we become victims. Okay? So I might present something to all 10 of you, and it works for 9 out of 10 of you, and one of you comes at the break and says, I totally didn't understand the piece on such and such. Great, let me try it in a different way. Okay? So part of knowing how to communicate with people is knowing about them and how they see the world. Okay? So when you travel to, how many of you have had the pleasure of traveling to a foreign country? Okay, so a little more than half. So when you're in a foreign country, do you even if you don't speak the language, do you try sometimes to have a phrase or two out of respect, right? A way to greet the local greeting, you know, the basics, right? So we're trying to speak in a way that other people can understand us, rather just in the way that we want to speak, okay? So, and this goes back to marketing, it's really customizing your message for other people. So it's important to know how people think. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Neuro Linguistic Programming. I'll put up a couple slides, but these are in your package. So Neuro Linguistic Programming, first of all, a disclaimer, I hate the name, but I didn't invent it. And it's now ingrained enough in our society and in many societies around the world that it's too late to change the name. But, so the idea of programming here is not that we're trying to program people or manipulate people. You just think about programming and kind of in a computer sense, it makes more sense. So the idea of NLP, the definition, the neuro part of it is our neurology and how we experience the world. Okay? The linguistic part, obviously, is human beings use language, both verbal and non-verbal, to make sense of our world. And programming is how we code things mentally. Okay? So my working definition of NLP is how do we use our language patterns to retrain our neurology. So how does our language impact our neurology? So after I finished my graduate work here, years later I went and worked for Johnson & Johnson and became really curious about listening to language and culture inside even a large corporation. And I was working on some health initiatives and doing some fun things. So I got some training in NLP, and it has been really transformative for me because it has really helped me to understand how other people and how I see the world and can communicate more effectively, more powerfully. So for me, it is just a powerful background in understanding how people think and how people build rapport. Okay? So a couple different dimensions. One is, let's talk just a little bit about rapport. Okay? How do you know how do you know that you've got good rapport with someone? What's the kind of the feeling? Forget what you're talking about, but what's the feeling when so you bump into somebody on Franklin Street you haven't seen in forever, and you have this great interaction for 2 minutes. You're laughing, talking, whatever, or maybe you're not even laughing, you're just talking about something, and you walk away and you go, oh, it's so good to see that person. What happened to that? So you can say you had good rapport. What's rapport?
No awkwardness.
So there's a lack of awkwardness. What is there?
Strong connection.
So there's a connection.
Communication.
Yeah, there was some communication back and forth. Okay, could be if there was some enthusiasm.
What about the tension of your body? You feel released?
Yeah, just the feeling that you have in your body. Okay, so your neurology is telling you something. It's like, oh, it just feels so good. But why did it feel so good to see them? I don't know, it just felt great to just run into them. And, yeah.
I feel like a lot of times those interactions, like it really doesn't matter what we're actually saying, the words coming out of our mouth. It's a lot more about the body language and within feeling the emotions expressed through the words, not necessarily I can say go up to someone and say okay, how was your day? Oh, it was great. How was yours? Great. And it's just alright, that's fine. But I go up to someone else, I'm like, oh hey, how was your day? I really care. And so getting that interaction where you have a feeling that they actually care, and having that reciprocated is really what makes that interaction
Great.
I
Yes.
think too, just a smile. Like a smile just can do so much, go a really long way.
It could. But what would happen to our rapport, Matilda, if I was having a horrible day and was really, really sad or upset about something? What would happen if you gave me one of your big fabulous smiles?
That would not be the right.
Yeah, it might not be the right.
But
So we can be, yeah. So in general, so rapport is a lot about matching. Rapport is a lot about matching. So if I took a video clip, if Nick was out on Franklin Street and saw you bumping into your friends and we didn't even have the audio, we just had the video, what might we see from those good interactions? What could we watch on a video? Like what's happening to your bodies when you have that quick, great
You
interaction?
lean into each other.
Could be leaning in towards each other,
A mirror, hug or body language.
and mirroring each other's body language just a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you may both be nodding. So there are ways, a part of what rapport is when people are having an experience of being similar to, it's just one working definition. When we have an experience of being similar to, regardless, as Elena said, of what we're talking about. Was it you? Yeah, doesn't matter what we're talking about, but we have an experience unconsciously. Okay? So our unconscious mind drives more than 90% of our behavior. Okay? So it's not stuff we're paying attention to. So I'm not saying, I'm frankly talking to Leroy going, oh gosh, he's nodding his head and I'm nodding my head, and yeah, but we just are experiencing something similar. So one of the ways we get rapport with each other is to do some physical matching, and it happens naturally. So you have some homework, okay? You might never see me again, so I'm not going to collect the answers. There is no grade and no extra credit. Go out today and start to notice, more than you have before, how people are physically matching each other unconsciously. So you will notice it almost everywhere if you have your radar on. You will notice it at bus stops, in elevators, at coffee shops, at a bar where people are having a beer, children playing on a playground. You will notice it everywhere. So just notice what people are doing in a restaurant. You know, one person leans in, another person will often lean in. I can also be in rapport with you if I lean back and you're leaning back. So there is some stuff about body language and that this is better and that this is close. But if we're both a little chilly and we're sitting with our arms closed, we can be in great rapport. So rapport is about doing some physical matching, and it happens kind of naturally, except when it doesn't. And so one of the reasons I bring it up in the context of the team piece is when things are starting to kind of fall apart or you're wanting to build rapport, is to build in some ways and strategies for people to be in rapport with each other and to pay attention to it. You're meeting somebody for the first time, you're trying to get some funding, you're going to do one of these interviews with Cube, right? How do you build rapport with somebody in 10 minutes, right? You already all did that with me this morning, right? There was some matching, some greetings, so knowing what to put your attention on. So your body language is one, okay? What else can we match besides body language? So we could turn the audio on now on the
The
film.
tone,
Hmm?
the tone
Yeah.
of the voice.
Right, so tone of voice is something that you can match and probably do naturally.
The speed that you talk at.
The speed, yes. So I'm from the Northeast, I talk too fast. When I'm talking with people, one of the ways I build rapport is to match their speed, okay? So if someone is talking really slow, I'm trying to kind of think through things as they go. And then I decide I'm gonna run over the top of them and just keep going really fast and then just, ask them what their next idea is. Yeah, we just broke the rapport. So I can slow down if I notice, right? So tone, speed, what else can you match with your language?
Your vocabulary,
Sorry?
your word choice. is all.
Word choice, yes. Okay, so matching other people's language and keywords, okay? This is important. When people use certain words, there are always thoughts and sounds and feelings connected in their neurology, okay? And so if someone says to you, if I come home and say, oh, what a long day, and my husband says, well, what was so bad about it? And I go, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. It's a long day, right? What was my key word? Long. If you change that to be bad, or what, it doesn't connect with me, right? Somebody says, that was the most frustrating meeting. Well, what did you hate about it? Well, I didn't hate anything, but it was, so saying back, what specifically was frustrating to you? You're staying in their kind of same channel with them. And so people will use key words. Some people that including maybe yourself, have a key word you use over and over. So they can be like, but they're words that have some emphasis. So listen for what people's key words are. I am fed up. Okay. you're already in rapport. Non-verbally and verbally, you've made a space for them to tell you what they're fed up about, right? So listening to the words they use, their tempo, their tone of voice, right, their pitch, there's so many things that you can pay attention to in terms of language. Right? We can also pay attention to someone's emotional intensity, right? So what does that mean? If somebody's really mad, do you have to get really mad in order to get rapport? What could you match when somebody's really upset about something?
I'd say just like their general emotions, so having a sense of empathy towards them. So if someone, you know, if your roommate comes back and says, man, I've had the worst day today, sort of like going through it with them and talking to them about it. Whereas, you know, if they had the worst day and you had the best day, don't necessarily be like, well, I had the greatest day and this is why, you know?
Right.
So just to sort of like you said, match them and I sympathize and empathize with them.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
And like, I feel like you can imagine like the listening that area, like the same way that they're dedicated to talking about or like addressing what was so like bad in their day, you can listen with equal intensity and like be engaged and ask questions.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So one of my short stories or examples is that when I first had children, I would read these parenting books that would say things like, when your kids are having a temper tantrum, which fortunately mine didn't do too much, but when they're having a tantrum and they're all upset, just be really calm. And so my kids would have a tantrum and I would, you know, and I would watch parents all over. I watched my friends all doing this, people in the grocery store, the kids having a full tantrum on the floor and the mother's going, okay, Johnny, okay, no, we don't use that voice out here. Okay, that's, and I never saw it work, ever. And it was once I went and got trained in NLP that I realized in that moment I was totally out of rapport with my kids. They're down there, I'm up here, they're upset, and I'm being really calm, right? And we were totally out of rapport. And so how do I get, and part of why we get in rapport is because it's one of the keys to influence, okay? And you guys are in positions to influence people, okay? You will only influence people who have an experience that they are similar to you. So when you're talking to them about your venture, when you're wanting to influence people to take on a new idea or take on a project, okay, they need to experience themselves as similar. You don't even have to agree about all the content of life, but you want to have them have some experience of being similar. Okay. So when my kid is on the ground having a temper tantrum, there's a lot I can match, okay? One is I can get down a whole lot closer to where they are, right? Right there I'm in more rapport, right? And then, without having a temper tantrum, I can match their breathing, and I can match their body movements, and I can ask them what's wrong and what they're so upset about, and I can use my voice to be really similar to them. And then once we're in rapport, what I discovered I could do was start to slow down my breathing a little bit, and guess what happened to their breathing? Just a little bit. And then I put a hand on the floor, and guess what they did? They put a hand on the floor. And then I sat down and was with them. And I sighed, and guess what they did? And then they were in a more resourceful state. So I influenced them by first matching them and then leading. So in leadership, it's not about getting out in front and leading, right? I could have stood there and said, now let's calm down. This isn't a good time for the tantrum. You know, stop that. It's not that important. But in 30 seconds, by building rapport with them, I could lead them then to a more resourceful state. Okay? So in leadership, and when I talk to coaching clients years after I work with them and say, when you think back on our experience of coaching, what pieces were most important? One of the things they'll tell me is learning about pace, 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 and then lead. Which in this language is like match, 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 and then lead. Once you're in good rapport with someone and you change a little bit, if they start to change with you, it means you were pacing them long enough. If they don't change, go back to pacing. Okay? So this is a really good strategy in life. You will use this at home, I promise, and in your ventures. And it's a great strategy when there's conflict, okay? People are upset about something. You know, you can match their emotional intensity without agreeing to their content. That's the difference. Rapport actually doesn't have that much to do with content. Yes, were you gonna ask something? Oh, no, sorry.
Yes. So like, what if someone is very, very tired and you can just see it from that person, he or she probably wants to go to sleep or something, and out of that emotion, like that tiredness, that person is feeling like anger, and you can feel like all these different emotions instead of just one particular emotion. Like, what do you do at that time? Like, do you match it somehow, or like, what do you do?
It depends on what your outcome is. If your outcome is to be in rapport with them, then the more you can match or empathize with that, the better, okay? And it is possible, so one is acknowledge it and say, you know, you seem really tired, this may not be the best time for this conversation. Or match their low energy for a while, for a couple minutes, and then see what you can do to say, you know, I want to get an idea or two going. I know you're a little bit tired, but would you be willing to take a walk with me for just 10 minutes? See if you can get the energy up a little bit, okay? You know, part of what you're pacing is also called the undeniable truth. When somebody is really exhausted, you're just stating the elephant that's standing in the room. You're exhausted, you know. Can you get excited about this one idea? Can we do half of the meeting today and do the other half tomorrow? Tell me what you need. Because again, the point isn't to drag people through a process if they're not in a resourceful enough place. So just stating it, you know, can be really useful too. Yeah.
What would you say in terms of applying this, you know, matching more to a situation in which someone is like really stressed out, they might be like frantic, not necessarily like a temper tantrum, but they're just like stressing out, and you know, like, because I've been in situations like that in the past in which I feel like the most appropriate response or the most most beneficial response for me would be to try to like be like, okay, like relax a little and balance them out by sort of doing the opposite, like pointing out, you know, the reasons why the situation isn't going to be the end of the world and why, you know, you can calm down a little. So do you think that it would be better to, like in the situation before doing that, like for me to increase my urgency and increase my, you know, stress, I guess, to match them before I try to do that?
What are people's thoughts?
I kind of have this experience a lot with one of the girls I live with who's always stressed out constantly, and telling her to calm down doesn't help.
Yeah.
It stresses her out even more because she feels like we're opposing her and we're not understanding her stress. So kind of like, I just relate to it, like, oh yeah, I have a ton of stuff to do too, but you know, we can take a break in a half an hour if you want to talk or get coffee or something. You just make a cup of coffee and sit down for 2 minutes.
Right.
So just kind of offer yourself as like a stress relief solution.
Right, right. So that's something that you know that you might do or verbally offer, which I think is great. And you know, when you're the one that's upset, we can all think of times when we've been upset, and someone with all good intentions says things like, "It's not as bad as you think. It's okay. Just calm down." Yeah. What happens in your body right now?
You get more tense.
Yeah. And it's like you totally don't get me. You don't. You know, I don't feel listened to. Right? So you right then have lost relationship, even though our intention is so positive, like, oh, well, let's try to be positive, there's so much to be grateful for, you know, like, you know, it's match where people are. That is their reality right then. And so just matching it, first of all, acknowledging it verbally, going, wow, it sounds like it's been a horrible day. And yes, actually, I would say matching their intensity a bit. So again, you don't have to get stressed, you don't have to take on that part of it, but I think you can match some of the other things that they're doing. You know, if they're like really nodding and talking fast, you could go, well, what specifically is going on? You know, and it's a place that you can flex. All of you know how to talk faster and slower. You may not practice it, but you can. And you've all been upset about something, so you know what it's like. So again, the idea isn't that you're necessarily getting totally upset, but you're trying to, part of what you're doing when you're doing this, you guys, this is not a technique that I want you to do to people, okay? It's just something I want you to be aware of the way in which you can be more relationships to a deeper level, okay? And we do this all the time without knowing it. So all of NLP is an observed science. The people who really came up with this notion 30 years ago, it was all because they observed how people get rapport, break rapport, all of that, okay? So the idea here is find some things that you can match to build that great rapport with people, and then notice the influence you can have. Match their keywords, empathize with them, but match their intensity a little bit. And there's so many ways you can do that. Now, a lot of people in here are nodders, and so there's a lot of us that are nodding with different things, yeah. There's ways in which you're already in your rapport with each other, with your groups, so, all right, so I'm gonna have you do an exercise. Okay. Yep, one question.
So like you mentioned that you don't want this to be something that is actively necessarily, like consciously. But like, how do you keep yourself from being like when you get up to that person who's really stressed and you start to match them? How do you keep yourself from kind of emotionally engaging and then leaving more stressed out as a result?
Yeah. Well, again, it's how do you take on some of the behaviors without necessarily going into the deep intensity of it. And I think, again, the ways in which you can match physiology can be really useful without taking on their exact stress. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, well, and we'll talk more about it too. Okay, so here's the assignment. We're an even number, which is awesome. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to break into pairs, and I'm going to ask you to work with people that you don't normally work with. So you guys work together some, so go find some new friends and people. And to set up for it's a quick assignment. The first thing you need to do is you need to find a topic that you both agree on, which will probably be fairly easy. And then you need to find a topic that you both disagree about. Something you hopefully authentically disagree about. So think politics, think religion, think private education, public education. It could just be sports teams, whatever. But find something that you can disagree about too. And when you have those, then the exercise really starts, and I'll give you the assignment. But you need to have those two in order to do the assignment. Is that clear? So let's use the space, stay within earshot, find a partner. You can sit, you can stand, you can sit in a lot, so if you want to stand, that would be great too. It's really difficult to have a hard time finding things that you disagree about really passionately. So, but you all have two topics now, right? One that you agree on that was easy to find, and then some of you something you really disagree on, and others of you are kind of stretching it around music or something that you are different enough that you can, right? Okay, so here's the exercise. Why don't you guys just come around here just for the instructions. Stay with your partner. Stay with your partner. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to start out, and I want you to talk about the topic that you agree on. Agree, right? And while you're doing that, I want you to completely mismatch each other. Okay? So if Leroy and I are talking, and he's sitting there, and we're talking about what we agree on, and we are going to completely mismatch each other. Okay? So he's standing, and however he's talking, I'm going to talk in a different way, and we're going to kind of just talk over each other. Okay? But we're really going to mismatch each other. Tone of voice, keywords, physically, everything we've talked about. We are going to mismatch each other. Okay? About the topic we agree on. Okay? Ready? Go.
All right. Well.
Yeah, so did it go pretty well?
Stressed out now.
Yeah,
It was so hard.
It was weird.
Yeah, it was so difficult.
It was so difficult.
We ended up
But you were talking about something you agreed on.
We ended up even more so disagreeing, even though we agreed on it. Being like, well, even though we agree on it, like I don't see.
Yeah.
I feel like we just didn't like go anywhere, like we were just like,
Yeah.
we ended where we started.
Yeah, but even though the topic was like what you both agree on, you just couldn't go anywhere. Yeah, so it was an exercise. So you were exaggerating your mismatch, although the two of you could not get out of being in rapport. It was like amazing. You're both sitting with your legs crossed. You started tapping your pencil. She started tapping her pencil. He started nodding his head. She nodding her head. And I'm going, aha, they need to practice on breaking rapport. Yeah, it's because it happens naturally, right? When you stop thinking about it, you are, in general, most of the day, you're in rapport with people. You are matching them unconsciously. All right, now, if you need to spread out a little bit, if it got too loud, just feel free to scooch back a little or stand up. So here's now, what you want to do is I want you to talk about the topic you disagree about, okay? And I want you to use everything that you've learned about rapport. We just talked about a little bit. You can do physical matching. I want you to notice a key word. Listen for a key word they use and repeat it back to them in some way. You know, what's important to you about price, what's important to you about community, what's important to you about world peace. You know, match their key words. Tone of voice, tempo, body language, right? And this is the topic you disagree on, okay? And if you can do it where you are, fine. Otherwise, move around the room because it gets a little loud. Ready? Go. It's always harder to get people to come back after whether in rapport, even though you're talking about things you disagree about. So let's come back to a circle, a better circle. Yeah. So what did you notice when you were talking about a topic that you disagree about? I'm going to ask you to switch back a little bit just so our circle's perfect and we can get Judy. Is it Judy? In there. Make sure we can see you. Yeah.
I've learned things that I didn't know about the opposing that I thought were like perfectly valid points that I just kind of taken into consideration.
So when you were in rapport, sounds like you were able to be a bit more curious. Right. You were actually able to learn something. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we actually were able to find common grounds on why. Like we said, we have like two different. We were talking about TV shows. I don't watch TV. I don't like watching TV and watching shows on TV.
Got it.
Judy does. But we were able to like find common grounds on like why I choose to watch shows in a different way.
Yeah.
I like to watch like shows on DVD so I can watch them all at once. Instead of watching them in like little segments.
Yeah.
But we like watching them the way that we do for the same reason.
Great. Great. So when we're in rapport, we were able to find a common ground. When we were in rapport, I was able to really learn something useful about the other topic. What else did you notice?
Our opposing view wasn't all that much different.
Yeah, our opposing views weren't that different. What else?
I wanted to talk more.
I wanted to talk more. I was engaged more, right? I rang my bell. It took much longer for people to come back. Even though you would think normally if you're in a disagreement and somebody rings the bell, it's like, oh, good, let's stop. No, you were ready to stop on the topic you agreed on, right? When you were mismatching each other. So, the power of rapport. And even though we do this in an exaggerated way for this exercise, in the real world it's much more subtle, right? It's a great book. It's actually not a great book. But it's a useful book called The Magic of Rapport, but I wouldn't mind to go spend $20 on it because it's about this, okay? The magic of rapport. So noticing the things that you can pay attention to and match. And you won't have to pay attention to this a lot of the time. but you will sometimes. How do you get good rapport in an interview? How do you, when the team isn't working well, what's happening with the rapport? Right? When somebody on the team is being really quiet, Zach, how do you establish some rapport with somebody who's really quite quiet? Right? How do you establish rapport and influence somebody in a team who's dominating a conversation? Okay, so I facilitate a lot of meetings, and sometimes there's somebody who's dominating big time. My job is to get a lot of rapport with that person so I can pace, and then lead them to getting more in line with how the whole group's participating. Okay, so really powerful to know about rapport, and it's one dimension of kind of a lot of what I learned in NLP. Okay, there's a couple other basics on NLP that I'm just going to highlight, and then we're going to move on. And I'm beginning to think that we could do a half day sometime on NLP because there's lots and lots of stuff. I did 2 28-day trainings on NLP to be certified, and so there's lots of rich stuff. Most of it you don't need to know, but the rapport is like the cornerstone of it. So let me point out just a couple other constructs, and then we're going to keep moving because I know you know that there's food here. One of the most important things about a good facilitator is to not stand between themselves and the food. So a couple of it. These are the 4 pillars of NLP. You can switch your chairs back for a minute, and I'm just going to describe the other terms. So another cornerstone of NLP is sensory acuity. So this is jargon. What do you think we mean by sensory acuity? Sensory acuity.
Really utilizing all your senses.
Yes.
Hearing, really seeing,
Yes.
feeling.
Yes. Right. So in NLP, the more that you're taking in all of the data in the room, and you're paying attention, like I was just paying attention to smells in the room, which is med-deli food, and I'm saying, that's data. Maybe we need to go to a break soon, right? What you're seeing, what you're feeling, what you're hearing. So part of NLP is paying attention to all of that, okay? So a couple things on that one. People learn in different ways. And the more that you understand that, the more powerful you can be as a team member, okay? So let's say that Michael and I are going to a restaurant tonight for dinner, and we walk in, the 3 of us, and I forget Diana. Okay, so we go to a restaurant tonight, and we walk in, and we open the menu, and I say, oh, salmon. That sounds good. Diana opens the menu and says, oh, salmon. That looks good. And Michael opens the menu and says, salmon. Yeah, I feel like salmon tonight. Looks good, sounds good, feels good. 3 different language patterns, okay? So, people generally have one primary channel. All of us take in data in all of our different senses. But each of us have generally a primary channel, okay? So if you're primarily visual, you're using words like, do you see what I mean? Yeah, I get your picture. You're using visual words, okay? If you're talking to someone who's really auditory, and you say, well, do you see what I mean? They might say, well, no, but it sounds good. They are going to use auditory words, okay? And that's because they think in sounds, okay? If you're talking to somebody who's primarily kinesthetic, they are going to learn by doing, and they need to feel things in order for it to make sense, okay? So they're going to use words like, that was a really rough meeting, okay? There was a lot of static. The whole thing just doesn't feel right to me. I can just tell you it does not feel right. Other people will say, it sounds like a mess to me. Right? So, listening to the language that people use. When I meet with a new client, at the end of that first hour, I have a little scribble note in their file about whether or not they're primarily visual, B, auditory, or kinesthetic. And so if they're visual primarily, and then auditory, and then kinesthetic, I will write in their folder VAK. If they're like really strong auditory, everything was about sounds, and I'll write auditory and circle it. And so I can adjust my language. It's another way I get in rapport. So I'm primarily visual. I know that about myself. So when I talk to certain clients who are really auditory, I have to talk in sounds. Right? How does that sound to you? Does that ring a bell? Yeah? So, starting to really pay attention to language patterns and how people talk. Gives you an idea to how they think and process information. So guess what? If you want to influence them, are you going to be better to influence them in your modality or theirs? Every time. Every time. And they're giving you hints about how they think about the world. And it's up to who to adjust. Yeah, ourselves. So, another homework assignment. Start to pay attention to whether or not people are primarily visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, and then pace that style. And most people have some range and flexibility, so I don't want you to, I can only use auditory words because they, you've got some wiggle room. But when you're in a situation where you don't seem to be getting rapport, and it doesn't quite click, it's a kinesthetic word, and auditory at the same time. When it doesn't quite click, you can start to pay attention. I wonder if I'm not matching them. So the reason I'm teaching you guys this stuff is I want you to have some things to pay attention to that will help you build a deeper rapport. Yes.
Okay, this may not happen very often, but what if you just have two people who are trying to match each other the whole conversation? But they're just really like being themselves.
It actually doesn't happen very often. People are matching each other almost all the time and being themselves. So again, part of how people get to be themselves is through their content too. And so it's, unless two people are starting out to only match each other, it doesn't really happen that way. I'm not answering that very well, but it's so unconscious that the kinds of things we're matching are just ways we're getting in rapport. And so I think, do you have an example of where that happens?
No, I was just curious because I just have like this vision in my head of two people talking and it's like they're both trying to like reload the personality.
Right.
They're just, yeah.
It's a great question. I mean, I think there's a good video in there somewhere. I think you don't want Yeah, well, and the other thing to remember is that this is not about mimicking. People will know, and first when you learn about this, people kind of go, oh, well, that's so silly. If he puts his pen in his mouth, then I should put my pen in my mouth. We're not talking about mimicking and doing everything. We're just talking about being in general rapport. So I'm not doing everything Leroy's doing, but our legs are both crossed at some point. We're both sitting similarly. We're looking at each other. We're in reasonable rapport. But we're not, so it's not about mimicking, miming, and doing everything. But it's about what can I pay attention to that I can be, if I want to be in even more rapport with him, what can I do? Yeah, question?
So what if you're in like a larger setting, like 10 people and stuff, like one-on-one or two-on-one?
Yeah.
So if you know for a fact one person is more auditory and the rest of the people are visual, like how do you manage that?
It's a great question, and you may notice that I've been using visual, auditory, and kinesthetic words all morning so that I'm touching on different ways, and sometimes when I repeat myself, I'll use different language patterns so that I'm connecting with different people in different ways. Yeah, it's important. It's important. Yes?
So I have a friend, this is just a random question. I have a friend who refers to, always says, does that make sense? What type is that?
It's primarily kinesthetic. So making sense is almost like they're making, it could be visual, but it's primarily kinesthetic of putting things together.
Okay.
Yeah. So kids who, any of you go to Montessori preschool? Okay. Big Montessori is built on kids learn by doing, and they can use all their senses, right? You get into a classroom, and things are really auditory, right? And visual kids are sitting there, and it doesn't mean anything until they put it up on the board, until they show a picture. Right? Kinesthetic kids in a traditional classroom don't get to learn as much. They're the ones that are often left behind. But you give me 20 pieces of pasta and let me sort them and count them, I can then tell you about adding and subtracting. Okay? So again, knowing, and a team, some of the teams you've talked about, is letting people figure out, are they primarily auditory, visual, or kinesthetic, and sharing that with each other. I'm a real visual. Oh, that's why every time I talk, what's one of the disconnects is I'm always talking in sounds and you're thinking in pictures. I can adjust. Let's adjust to each other a little bit, And then you can have some fun with that as team members. And again, it's not the same stuff that you learn when you're building a house together, but there's lots of opportunity.
Another quick question. Do you think that kinesthetic works best with kinesthetic, or do you think that the dynamic of having an audible person with a visual person would improve?
Oh, on a team, the more that you can have the diversity, the better.
Yeah.
Because some people are going to think and feelings and sounds. It's great, and it will tear the team apart on some level if you don't recognize that that's a difference, okay? So, and you sometimes, if we were a team, we could say, okay, we've got 4 strong visuals, tell us what the picture looks like, draw us a picture, make it fit, da, da, da. So if this program is really successful, what will people be saying about it a year from now? And you figure out what they're gonna be saying, and then what's this program gonna really feel like? We've got our strong kinesthetics over here. What do we want people to feel at the end of this initiative? Boom. It's fabulous. We've got visual, we've got auditory, we've got kinesthetic, because guess what? Whoever your end users are, there are gonna be some auditories and some visuals and some kinesthetics. So bring it in, but notice that it's a different, rather than, no, I just think we just need to be clear about what it is. Like, well, be clear about what? This doesn't sound right. It's like, oh, clear, he's got to draw a picture. Do you ever in a room, people go, can I just draw a picture of the flip chart? And then it's like, and then for other people, it'll click. And other people go, I already knew you meant that when you said that. Because they're an auditory, they already got it. So notice what the difference is and acknowledge it, because then you get to play with it as a strength rather than something that, is there a light bulb going off over here?
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't even know how many. Zach knows working with me. Every time we have any sort of meeting, anything, I'm like sitting down with my pen, like making out outlines. I have to have it all like written out, like in front of me.
Or it's not real.
Exactly.
Got it.
Or like even like if I'm not understanding them, I'll ask someone like, can you just write it out so I can see it.
Yes,
That's,
absolutely.
And then I've never thought about it.
Yeah. So noticing what the differences are in the meeting. So that's sensory acuity in some forms, paying attention to your style and other people's style. Behavioral flexibility, okay? One of the presuppositions of NLP, and this will be so useful, I think, for your projects, is the element in the system with the most flexibility has the most power. I'm not sure if that's true, but I think it's a useful belief. The element in the system with the most flexibility has the most power. So in a really big windstorm and all the trees are blowing way back and forth, at the end of the storm, which ones are left standing? The ones that can bend, right? The further ones break off. The ones that can bend are left standing. So the idea there is being flexible. So if the way that we're working together isn't working, the way I'm communicating with you isn't working, if I can be flexible and change my style, I have the most power. And again, I'm not meaning power over you, but power to then change and keep things moving. If I don't have any flexibility in how I'm going to present this material, so some of the ways I'm presenting it to you guys is different than I do in a business context. So it's the flexibility, depending on your audience, depending on the situation, being flexible. Being flexible with your visual, auditory, kinesthetic. You can change your language patterns, you just got to put some attention on it. Okay? And then the last one is well-formed outcomes. And this really goes to, and actually, Nick, the piece that you and I were talking about at the break, this might be a useful piece for you for that conversation we were having too, which is that one of the most powerful questions you can ask people when they come to you with, an idea, a concern, whatever it is to ask somebody, what do you want? Okay, so as an RA, people come to you with a complaint. They might come to you with a idea. Asking, what is it that you want? And it sounds so basic, but oftentimes it's a really useful intervention because oftentimes people aren't quite clear about what they want. Well, I want you to help me make a decision. Oh, all right, good. Now I'm clear. You want me to help you make a decision. Right, so where do we start? Where are you with it? I've got 15 minutes. I can help you make that decision. I just want to complain. I just want to be heard for a few minutes. I can do that. Right. I really want to plant a seed for an idea and figure out a good funding source. Right? Very clear outcome. So asking yourself and other people before you venture into something, what is it I want? What's my outcome? Because if you don't know, then you're just going to kind of meander. And then you leave a meeting. So at the beginning of a meeting, being able to say, here are 2 outcomes. Tonight, we need to all be updated on X, Y, Z, and we need to know who's working on project ABC. That's our outcome. And be sure to write it on a flip chart for your visuals. Right? Here are 2 outcomes. That way when the meeting starts to get a little woolly and you're meandering, going, you know what guys, I want to bring it back because tonight we're doing these 2 outcomes. This is where we said we wanted to go. And those other things are important, And I'll start what I call a parking lot over here on this flip chart so we don't lose those good ideas, but they're not helping us with this outcome. Know what your outcome is. Yes?
Okay, so if people come to you and they don't know what they want,
Yes.
how can I help them figure that out?
Yep. So oftentimes you'll get the answer, I don't know. Okay, so a powerful question can be, well, what do you not want? Actually, I think people do know what they want if they can start kind of talking it through. Well, I don't really know, I just wanted to stop by and talk to you about a bunch of ideas. Okay, so you want to talk about a bunch of ideas. And what would you hope we could accomplish by kind of talking through those ideas? Well, I guess I mostly just want to narrow it down because I've got like 10 good ideas, but maybe if I just had like 2 or 3 that were really useful. Okay, so you'd like to narrow it down to 2 or 3. Yeah, I don't know, like I just feel like I need to know where to start. Okay, so you'd like to narrow it down to 2 or 3 ideas and you'd like to kind of know where to start. Is that? Yeah. And then you'll notice that like you just help them figure out what their outcome is. If you did nothing else but help them figure out what their outcome is, you brought clarity in that moment. Just by asking a couple questions and being receptive and staying out of their content, not suggesting, well, do you think it is that you want to have more ideas? Well, are you looking mostly for funding sources? Well, do you think you're looking for new partners? It's like the power of asking the right questions, okay? That's important as a team leader and it's important as a follower. To ask yourself sometimes, what is the most powerful question I could ask right now? What is the most powerful question? And sometimes the most powerful question you can ask is tell me more. Tell me more about X. X is their keyword. So I do think that and oftentimes I go into organizations, I meet very senior leaders. Oh my God, I don't even know what I want here. It's like a mess. I mean, I've been here for those years. I mean, this group doesn't get along with this group, and this group isn't, and this. Well, what is it that you want? Well, I don't know what I want. I just want you to fix it. Okay, so you want me to fix it. What would it look like if it were fixed? Well, people would be starting to get along. We could get some of this conflict on the table. So I just get, sometimes in the whole hour, all I get is what their outcome is. So it sounds like what you really want is this and this and this, and they go, yeah. And I write it on an index card, even if they're not visual, because people value seeing something. And I go, it sounds like this is what you want. Is this pretty close? And their whole physiology, this is where the neuro part comes in. I've left them feeling heard, I've matched their keywords, I've helped them get a good outcome, I've been flexible with them. And their whole physiology shifts. And they go, yeah, that's what I want. So the reason people call me for the work I do is the diagnostic work I can do for them, separate from when I come back and do any intervention. That is an intervention. When you help someone get a really well-formed outcome, and you've really listened to them and built some rapport, you have done a huge intervention. You have brought people's authenticity forward. You've created the possibility of building that trusted partnership. Makes sense? Seems so simple, huh? But it makes you realize there's a lot of components of the trusted partnership. And most of the things I've talked about, you've done at least once. Yeah. So those are what we call the 4 pillars of NLP. There's so much more underneath that around how to communicate, how to build rapport. A lot of the language patterns, again, are things like listening to how you use language and the impact that it has on people. Okay? We can talk more about that, probably not today. So what about if you get a plate of food and come back and we will do 2 more minutes on communication, and then I really want to talk about the power of filters. So I went online a couple days ago and I asked 10 other coaches that if there's one thing that they wish they had learned when they were in college about communication and human interaction that they know now that they didn't know then, and this was the #1 answer. It was around understanding perceptions and filters. So I'm going to do that piece because I think it hits on teamwork and it a lot. So grab a plate, come back. Yes. Everybody's going to ignore about
Yeah. Okay, let's come back and get started. Okay, so I'm going to go through one or two more quick things on communication, and then we're going to talk a little bit about filters, and I think it's going to probably be a wrap. And we'll see how we can pull all this back together towards the end. Any feedback so far? Are you getting some of what you came for? You need more of? You need less of? What would make this better? Anything coming to mind?
Was there a time at the end for just general questions?
Yeah.
Or is that this time?
Yeah, either one. You have a question now while people are munching?
I don't know. Okay, well, no, I do know.
I had a feeling you knew. Mm-hmm.
So one of the biggest frustrations for me in having a position where we're trying to relay information to a group of peers that all have the same goal is, and this, I don't know. Anyway, so during a meeting or during a time of trying to relay this information, people talking and people not really paying attention. And I let it frustrate me probably more than I should, but I'm wondering ways to get around that without being a dick about it. You know,
Yeah.
How do you say shut up and pay attention without actually saying shut up and pay attention?
Great. It's a great question. Yeah. Any of you tried strategies that work well?
I kind of ignored it because I didn't want to seem mean.
Uh-huh.
I didn't want to be like, guys, pay attention. This is really rude. You're talking over me. These two girls were just having their own conversation.
Yep.
I'm trying to do things, and I'm just okay, that's
Yeah.
cool.
So all of you know what this problem is like, right? Right? Have any of us in this room ever been guilty of the behavior we're talking about? Okay, right? Got it. So it's easy to slip on that, right? And oftentimes our positive intention, if I start to lean over and talk to Leroy about something, is just what? What might the positive intention be?
Ask for clarification.
Yeah, I might be asking for clarification. I might be excited that I have an example of. Regardless, even though I'm excited about it and I have some positive intention while I tell something to Leroy, what's the impact on the rest of you potentially? Frustration, you feel disrespected, disrespected, at the very least distracted, right? So it does impact the group process, okay? Have any of you tried anything that's worked?
It's not really something I guess to do in the meeting, but something that I think I found recently is have a separate meeting that talks about the mission of your group and allow people to share why they're here and what they think the mission is without explicitly stating our mission is to let people try to fill it in themselves and for me personally that just really built morale made me more excited to be there kind of reminded me of what I was doing there and then maybe at the next meeting it'd be better. I don't know, but
well, the wonderful thing is usually during the meetings and during the extraneous talking, they're talking about things that they're so happy for about the group, or they're so excited about the event that we just relayed to them, and oh my gosh, I can't. But then it's a 3-minute to 5-minute stop, and then they're talking, which is great even for me to see at the front of the room, the bonds that it's great to see that they can communicate so comfortably with each other. But then it holds up the whole meeting.
Got it.
For several minutes.
So a couple ideas. One is if you're calibrating and noticing that it's because something you've just said and people are excited, then make space for it. Is to say, so it seems like a lot of people are excited, take a minute and talk to the person next to you about what's most exciting, and move into it. You're pacing them, you're getting in step with them. And take 3 minutes where everybody can talk about it. And if you want to, and then you don't always have to report out, but if you want people to report out, then have people report out on their partner because they will talk less, right? So Judy just said she's excited because this is going to fit into her major, and she says, well, Trisha's excited about this effort because she's done some work on this in the past. Boom, and let them report out rather than me telling my story of blah 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 blah. If you have your partner report out, it's briefer. So if it's really that you think the primary cause is people are excited about that thing, just take 3 minutes because you'll get more value of it. Okay. That's one thing. Another thing, and it goes back to something we talked a little bit about earlier, is it's one thing to be clear about the mission and what our outcomes are, but you've got to have some operating agreements, some ground rules for how we're going to behave with each other. And so being willing to point that out. So let's say you're starting a group, you're starting a team, you've got 7, what are the few ground rules we want to have about how we participate in these meetings? We're going to meet every Monday night, okay, from 7 to 9. What are the important things? Here's where we're going. Here's our mission. This is what we're excited about creating in the world. What guidelines do we have to have in place about how we want to behave with each other so we can be wildly successful? That's the where we're going. Now, how do we want to behave? And then sit with the quiet. Well, I think everybody needs to be heard. Okay, that's a ground rule. Everybody needs to be heard. What's another one? Well, I think people should really try to be on time. Otherwise, we're always kind of catching people up. All right, are people willing to be on time? The meeting is from 7 to 9. Are people willing to really commit to being on time? And somebody might say, you know what, I have a class till 7. Can we do it at 7:10? Then I can really be on time. You guys, how does 7:10 to 9:10 work for people? Yep, that works. All right, so we're going to be on time. Official time is 7:10. Great. What about the group process? Is that from time to time, I want everyone to participate, but what about sidebar conversations and bring us up? In a group, sometimes people start to talk. What's the impact on all the rest of us when people start to talk? And do it just the way I just said it. Like it's, the positive intentions, you might be excited about something, but what's the impact? In the distinction between what your intention is and what your impact is. Your intention might be positive, but your impact is, it gets distracting. So are we willing to actually have a ground rule that says we're going to really resist that? If you've got something to say, jot it down, and we'll make time for it. But we're not going to get into these sidebar conversations, right? So you get 3 or 4 or 5 ground rules. We're going to tell the truth, whatever it is. And then you bring those to every meeting because that's part of developing trust and partnership. And it takes almost no time, and you can get a really good return on your investment, which is to say, I just want to remind you, and we have one new team member this week who wasn't here last week because I suspect your teams change form over time. These are our ground rules. We're all committed to being on time. We're all going to speak up. We've agreed to resist having sidebar conversations so that there's less distraction. Boom, boom, boom. And here's our mission as a group. This is our outcome. So do that housekeeping, okay? And with certain teams, I do that every single time. Here are our ground rules. Sometimes I don't put it up and I go, who can remember what the ground rules are without looking? Okay, great. We're going to all show up on time. Great. What else? Now, will people be perfect? Probably not, right? But then we hold each other accountable. It's not just my job as the leader or your job as the leader, but I noticed you've been late the last 3 or 4 meetings. Is this not working for you to get here on time because it's a little distracting? Or I noticed there's some sidebar conversations, guys, when we come back after break, let's all go back to that ground rule about staying full attention in the room. So again, just acknowledge it. You don't have to make anyone bad or wrong, be a dick about it. But you can also say it. Again, it's probably in people's blind spots about how distracting or disruptive it can be, but it is. It can really derail you. Does that help?
Oh, very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So my group is a bit unique in the sense that there are a few UNC undergrads, and it's becoming more of like a community-based team. There's a lawyer, there's a retired social worker, so the age range is diverse.
Yeah.
And so what I've seen is like some of the undergrads feel that lack of confidence. They think, oh, that social worker probably knows about that. I can just keep quiet. I don't think I have anything to contribute. Even though I know they have a lot to contribute, they're extrovert and all, but I feel like they feel like they don't have enough to contribute just because there are other people like who have that expertise, or, like, who have that experience. So how do you deal with that?
Well, one strategy is to acknowledge the value of the diversity. And so sometimes when I feel like that's happening in a room, I will ask people to actually start the sentence. Sometimes I'll use a metaphor of like we're all living in this house, but we're looking out different windows. And so, as a student, the window I'm looking out, here would be my suggestion or my idea. Well, as a retired social worker, my idea would be, and there's none that are more valued or important, but everybody brings a different perspective, and if we can get everybody's, and I suspect in that room that, again, acknowledgement, but that the older people who've got more experience are going to be so delighted at the refreshing new ideas of younger people, and so again, acknowledging the diversity and saying we all have something to share. Okay, good questions, good questions. So communication, in our message we have the words we use, we have the tone of voice, and we have our facial expression, and this is already in your notes, so you probably have seen. In communication, only 7% of our message is the words that we choose. And 35% is from our tone, 38% is from our tone of voice, and about 55% is from our body language. So we've been focusing a bit on some of the words we use and matching keywords and listening, and language is really important. And it's not the most important part of your message. So this research is old. There's been people who've said these numbers aren't quite accurate, and they could be off by a lot, but I think the theme is there, the melody is there, which is that basically when this is useful is if your verbals do not match your nonverbals, what will be telling the truth? What will people believe? Every time, right? So if you say things like, well, yeah, I'm really excited about your project. Yeah. What do you believe? Not so excited. Yeah. Yeah. Great job on that presentation you gave. Yeah. Not so much. Yeah. So the idea here is to check for your own congruence and know that your nonverbals speak a lot. And so again, I can't necessarily always judge what your nonverbals mean, but I can check it out, right? So I heard you say that I did a good job on it, but I wasn't totally convinced by some other things. So just notice that you're communicating, and it's one of the reasons we say communication is redundant, because you're always communicating. At the very least, you're communicating non-verbally. I'm here, I'm engaged, I'm checked out, I wish I were somewhere else. Usually you can tell with people's body language, including your own. Okay. So powerful communicators know what they want. They know the message they're trying to get across. They're good at noticing the response they get. Okay, that's one of the paramounts of a really good communicator. Okay, and if I want to notice the response I'm getting to what I'm saying, where should my attention be? On you. Right. And oftentimes when we're communicating or speaking, where do we put our attention? On ourselves. Am I saying it right? Am I doing it right? And really, the answer is always in the other person. If I look across at you, I'll be able to figure out. I can calibrate. Yes, you're with me. I've lost you. Yes, you're engaged. This is upsetting somebody, right? So put your attention on the other people and read them. And then good communicators have the flexibility to keep adjusting and modifying their behavior until they get what they want. All right, I'm going to save this video for a minute. So what I'd like to do is to talk just for a minute about filters and kind of, actually let's, let me talk about filters for a minute, because otherwise we're going to totally run out of time. So I will show you this video. Has anybody seen this video? Does that picture look familiar to anybody? No? Good. Good, 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 good. All right. I want to make sure that these get posted. Okay. So what do I mean when I say a filter? What do you know about a filter, just in the real world?
Always take into consideration your environment, the setting that you are in, the people that you are with, the type of situation that it is.
Yep, the context is really important.
Adjust your output accordingly, whether that be what you say, how you say it, the way you present yourself.
Yep, yep. What's the job of a filter? Like, think simple here. Coffee filter. What's the job of a coffee filter?
It's a screening.
It's a screening. So it lets some stuff through, and it keeps other stuff back, right? So when our coffee filters are working right, that's what they do. The mornings they don't work right, it's a bit of a mess. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. So a filter, by its nature, is going to let some stuff through and keep other stuff out, okay? And we all have filters, every one of us, on how we see the world, right? Yeah? Okay. So the question is, let's just say something happens in the world and we all have our filters that we see the world through, and we're over here, this is you or this is me, and we look at, yeah, now you know something more about me, my art skills, or the lack thereof. But the idea is that we all have filters. Where do our filters come from? Where do your filters come from? How we were raised. Yep. So how we were raised, and that kind of encompasses a lot of things, right? So it could be our parents or whoever our caregivers were that raised us, parents or grandparents, other adults. What else is part of how we were raised? Yeah. So experiences in general. And so our experiences of this specific event or other similar events, because we make things similar, right? What else? Where do our filters come from?
Our culture.
Absolutely, from our culture. And that can be your culture that you bring from Thailand. It can be your culture from Western North Carolina, Eastern North Carolina. It could be your own subculture of your family. Yeah? Yep. But our culture really does dictate a lot of how we see the world. Okay? Where else do our filters come from?
Your sort of general personality.
Yep, they absolutely do come from that a bit. Okay? What else affects how you see the world? Where do your filters come from? Yeah. And so for some of us, our religious background is a place where we learned what's right or wrong, what's good or bad, whether or not we still ascribe to that or we're responding against it, right? Yeah. A couple others, real powerful places some of our filters come from.
Your emotional state at that time.
Yeah, certainly our emotional state at the time. So I know, for example, when I am well rested, right, I'm a really good parent. And when I'm really tired, well, not so much. Yeah. Spill a glass of milk today? No problem. Let's clean it up. Spill a glass of milk tomorrow? Bah! Right? My emotional state at the time. Make sense? Yeah, when we're at our best, when we're at our worst. Our filters also really come a lot from kind of isms, right? All the isms that we have create filters. Racism, sexism, ageism, right? And a lot of that comes from hearsay. Things that we've heard. So how many of you had the experience that you go online to, I forget the name of the website, to see which professors are good, right? What's it called?
Rate My Professor.
Yeah, Rate My Professor. Yep. What do you do in that moment? You read those few comments, guess what? More filters. You know, this professor's going to be really great, right? Positive filter. Oh, this professor's just going to be horrible. You add filters. You see friends, you kind of go, how was that band that you saw last year? Were they any good? Oh yeah, they're really awesome. Positive filter. So a lot of hearsay, what other people tell us, right? So our filters come in from lots of different places, and they say a lot about who we are, okay? So let's say you've got somebody, let's say that we're a team. Okay, let's say that we're a team, we're working on something, and this is our retreat today, and there's one guy on the team named Joe, and Joe, we all agreed we were going to be here at 9:30 sharp, and Joe shows up at 9:45, comes in, and ends up on the floor over there, okay? So you see, Joe's on the floor, you see it through your filters, okay? What meaning might you make of that? What meaning might you make? So he ends up on the floor. What might you think in your head?
Can you clarify that? You like he falls down?
I'm not going to clarify it. That's by design.
Okay.
Okay. So one option is he fell down. Okay. You said he might be drunk, passed out.
I said there's not enough seats.
There's not enough seats, so he just sat down. Yeah. Other possibilities? He doesn't want to distract, right? Okay, so all those are possibilities, right? But the minute he hits the floor, we make a meaning of it, okay? And then we usually make a judgment pretty quick, and then we behave in some way based on that. So let me just write behavior here, okay? So let's say some of us know Joe, okay, pretty well, and we know that he's a severe diabetic. So that's one of our filters. He's a diabetic. He comes in and kind of lands on the floor, and what do you immediately think? Yeah, he has low blood sugar, right? There's no judgment that that's bad or wrong, right? And so how might you, and there's not right or wrong answers here, I'm just playing with this, how might you behave? What might you do? Okay, so you could help him out. You could give him orange juice, you could offer him food, you could call 911, right? Okay. Okay. So those of you who've got some previous experience with Joe, because you have a filter, is that the last couple meetings he has actually shown up either drunk or really hungover. And you've actually talked to him about it. He comes in 15 minutes late, ends up on the floor, and you say in your own head right away, uh-oh, Joe's drunk, right? Or hungover, right? Your judgment just goes good, bad, right, wrong. Is that good? Bad? Bad. You know, this is a team retreat. You don't show up drunk at these kinds of things, right? So how might you behave? And again, there's different ways you could behave. What might you do?
I get angry.
Right.
He's not taking it seriously.
Right. So your response is, because you make the judgment that that's bad and wrong, you get angry. And so when you're angry, what might you do? And again, we're just brainstorming here.
Scold him.
So you could scold him. You could say, what the hell, you know, we've asked you not to do that. So you could scold him. What else might you do? You could ignore him. Yep. Right. You know, if you're his best friend and you have a slightly different filter, you might do something different. Okay? Okay. So the behaviors are usually things like we either avoid or withdraw, or we kind of dominate and attack. We kind of either move in. It's sort of the fight and flight. Okay. So for those of you who know Joe, we're going to just go one more round, and he tends to be the class clown. He just always has got to be the center of attention. He's always a jokester, often disrupting meetings, trying to be kind of the center of attention. He comes barreling in here late, ends up on the floor. What meaning do you make? Here's Joe being a goof, right? Is that good or bad in this context? Yeah, it's inappropriate. We're trying to have a team meeting. Now you're disrupting things. So how might you behave with Joe?
I would be frustrated.
Okay, and so how would you behave?
I would be like, you know, what's going on? Like,
Okay.
why are you playing around?
Okay,
Can you focus, please?
right. So you could kind of move into it and have that conversation. What's another thing you might do? Not pay attention at all. Not going to even give him the attention. Okay, so you could do the avoid withdraw. Okay, the idea here is that how all of us, oh, this is really a messy flip chart, how we are behaving in the world has very little to do with what just occurred. How we are behaving in the world with other people has everything to do with the meaning and the judgment that we make. And this takes a nanosecond. Joe ends up on the floor, and we leave here, and somebody says, did you see that Joe was drunk? No, he wasn't. He was just late. No, he tripped over a trash can. No, he didn't. Because you all have different filters. Okay? So we have filters, and we need filters, okay? Because the human brain can only pay attention to 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information at any given time. And we have 1 million bits of information coming to us at any time, right? So your left elbow was completely fine and you weren't paying any attention to it until right now, because I've drawn your attention to your left elbow, right? You've been screening out that left elbow, filtering out that left elbow all day. We pay attention to where we put our attention, okay? And our attention goes to things that generally violate our values, okay? So somebody comes in late all the time and you say to so-and-so at the break, why is so-and-so always late? And Leroy says to me, I don't ever notice she's late. You know, she's always here sort of at the beginning. I mean, I don't even notice that. Well, for me, that's really important. I have a value around timeliness. For Leroy, not so much. It's not that important to him. Same data. I mean, we could do a video and say, yes, she comes in at 9:01 and therefore she's late. But to me, it's really important. To him, it's not important. He's got different filter on that. Okay? How many of you have siblings? Yeah? How many of you sometimes talk with your siblings and realize you have different views of mom and dad and how you were raised? That will get to be even more so as you get older. But you had the same parents, but you had different experiences of it. So the idea here is to just notice that you are looking through your filters at the world. And the goal isn't to not have filters, because we can't go through life walking down the street going, oh, left elbow, right elbow, this person, that person. We have to screen out most of the stuff. But just notice that your filters determine the meaning and the judgment you make and determine your behavior. So rather than saying, well, I had to yell at Joe because he was drunk, is to know that, you know what, my perception is that he has been drinking. I think that's inappropriate, and so that's why I've chosen to talk to him. Do you see the difference? And the real mischief in here comes, though, is that the human brain likes to hunt for evidence that we're right. And so once we make up our mind about somebody, we tend to unconsciously hunt for evidence that we're right. And we generally start generating filters about each other about 45 seconds after we meet each other. So by saying, well, I've only lived with my roommate for a month, I don't really have any filters yet. You've got lots of filters on him, you've got lots of filters on her, they've got lots of filters on you. They can be positive and they can be negative, but the point is they limit the relationship. So just notice that the filters are in place and that they do dictate what you see. Does that make sense? Yeah, questions?
Yeah. So after that behavior part,
Yes.
I feel like a lot of us will be taking try to fix that situation.
Uh-huh.
And I think, like you're saying, our filters will dictate how we go around doing that. So I don't think we have the time to talk about behavior modification, reinforcement, extinction, all that. So I think that's where all those things comes into play, right?
Yeah.
There's a right way and a wrong way to deal with that.
Yeah, and we could talk, and I'm glad to talk offline a lot more about that, because part of what happens in human interactions is my behavior, I call this a compensating behavior, my behavior then bumps into your behaviors, and we get into what I call a limiting loop, okay? So the shortest and quickest story I can tell you is I used to do a lot of training with one of my colleagues with bank tellers, okay? And it was on customer service. It was real basic communication. So the idea with the bank tellers is the bank teller is standing there one morning, the woman is, and she's having a good day, and this guy comes in and he's having a horrible day. I mean, his car broke down, the paperwork was wrong. He comes into the bank, he's in a horrible mood, and he comes up and she says, "Good morning, how can I help you?" And he says, I need these forms, I need them now, and last week the person did them wrong, and I need it fast, and I've got a plane to catch. And she's trying to help him, and he's just being belligerent, right? And he walks away, and she says to her colleague, "What a jerk," right? So now it's a week later, she's standing there, she looks across the lobby, the door open, and guess who walks in? Who? The jerk, right? And so what does she mentally prepare for? She's got a filter. Here comes a jerk. So how might I unconsciously, without giving it a lot of thought, how might I behave? Right? So he walks up to the window, life is fine now, right? Car is working, he's not in a hurry. And he comes in and says, "Good morning," and how can I help you? He thinks, what's her problem? Well, I just need this, I need this. And she's saying, yeah, I know. And she starts being like this, and guess what he starts behaving like? Like that, like a jerk. And he goes, "Well, I understand what you were trying to do. You just need to sign right here." "Well, okay, I'll just sign right here." And guess what? He acts like a jerk. And it happens all the time in human interactions. She unconsciously brought out the worst in him because she had her filter on. He's going to be a tough guy. He's going to be a jerk. And again, it wasn't conscious, but it is what happens all the time in customer service. So once you get a filter on somebody, you know what? They showed up at team meetings, they're late, you make a judgment. They don't care about this, so what do? Back away. They're not going to be that involved. They always come late, they don't participate that much, so I'm not going to include them. So it's, again, another opportunity. So the idea here, and I wish we had a whole lot more time to go into this more, but the idea is here, filters are not bad or wrong, and you cannot get rid of them. The reason that they're important to know about is that they're always in place, and if you aren't aware, they will run you. So and here's your third and final homework assignment, is to think about an interaction that you have with someone, and it could be in one of your venture groups, it could be a roommate, it could be a partner, where there's a rub, right? So I do this, I meet with a client and I just don't feel like it goes very well and I'm getting ready to go back and meet with them in 2 weeks, is I think about what are all my filters on this person, okay? And maybe write them down. And what are my judgments, okay? My filter is, they're not very committed, that's bad or wrong. They weren't telling me the whole truth, that was bad or wrong. So if I'm not careful, I'm gonna compensate in some way. So notice what your filters are and then ask, I wonder how, given how I might behave if I'm not careful, how I might bring that out in them. Because there's always a dance. Because guess what? They have filters on you too. So you avoid somebody on the team because they're not being a team player and they see you avoid them and then they go, well, I guess he doesn't really care about my involvement on the team, so I'll just withdraw too because I'm not really valued. And then you go, see, he isn't really invested. And so you back up more and then guess what? You both get to be right about how wrong the other person is, but you don't get what you want because you aren't moving towards each other. And this is a little bit where feedback comes back. So rather than moving towards the person and saying, I notice you've been coming late and I have a sense that you're not as engaged and I really want your input, how can I support you in that and bring closer, we just kind of, and this is what we do. And we have filters on ourselves. We have filters on our parents. We have filters on our friends. We have them on our next door neighbors. We have filters on the homeless people on the street. We have all kinds of judgments and all kinds of behaviors that are automatic. So my request on this one is just to start to notice. If I had you write down your filters of the 5 people in your life right now, like the 5 closest people to you, and read me the list, I would learn so much about you. I would learn about what's important to you, and I would learn what you sort for, and I might or might not learn a little bit about the other people in your life. So your filters say more about you than they do about the rest of the world, and you do have some control over that. Yes, question?
Quick question. I think I already had a notion on the idea of filter. Is it what you don't say or what you think about the other person?
Say it again,
Is
please.
a filter what you don't say because you know the characteristics of the person, or is a filter what you think about them?
A filter is my impressions, what I think about somebody based on my previous experiences in my life.
Okay.
Okay? Does that help?
I think I know what you're talking about because people say like, oh, that person doesn't have a filter. They just
Yeah,
kind of like
yeah.
word vomit and they're just saying kind of weird stuff.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
And the way I'd always thought about filters is like, you see these things about some person, and you're like, oh, I shouldn't use this type of language around them because it would make them uncomfortable.
Yes, yes.
So it's-
So filters are very useful.
Filter on a camera lens and a filter like a coffee filter that holds things back. Like it's like how you view the world rather
Yep.
than how you like
Right.
straight what you say.
I think it just took me some time to realize the differences. So I think I'll just need some more time just to think about it.
I think they're connected though.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah,
Yeah, one of the
exactly.
ways I think about it is similar to a camera lens. It's sort of like, if you took like different colored cellophane, if I have a filter, against or for something, and I have several of those in place, I'm just going to see less. I'm going to see things that fit my model of the world, right? So if you've ever gone to a place with a brand new culture, well, I just bring my white Western eyes to this, and I'm just shocked. I'm sure that you've come here from Thailand. It's like, with these filters. So we create filters, and they're not bad, but they are sometimes get in the way. And so when you're in a rub with someone, being willing to say, what are my filters on this person? Could I pull them aside and maybe hunt for evidence that I've been wrong? Oh, they're not a team player. Oh, they don't care about other people. Oh, they're arrogant. And give up hunting for evidence always that I'm right. So again, just notice when they're in place and when they're running you rather than you running them, because it's an important piece. And there is a way that we can inadvertently bring out the worst in each other. Yes?
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I was thinking about that question too, filters with a noun and a verb. So in the way that we see the world, we actually do end up filtering our own filters.
Exactly. So I'm going to show you a quick video on what happens when filters are in place and you can bring out the worst in each other. Now, the problem with this is that we don't have speakers. So it's quiet. I'm going to play it as loud as I can. And we tested it earlier. You will be able to hear it, but you'll just have to be real quiet, okay? So this is just a silly example of when you get filters and how they can take over you. Oh, and then she says, I just don't know what happened. So I see things like that happen in the workplace, where there's people standing around watching a conflict that might go on for 3 months, where people are bringing out the worst in each other and don't realize it, and need to be right. Can you see that in there? I mean, I just think it's a fun video, but it's an example of how when we get caught up in our stuff, we can just really bump into each other. So we have time for 1 or 2 questions, and I'll show you a closing video, and we'll call it a day. We've covered a fair bit of ground on teamwork and some self-awareness and some communication. Thoughts or questions? Yes?
Well, what if this thing happened in the office and you are the boss of these 2 people? How can you solve the conflict?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that maybe we'll end up doing a bigger session on conflict in general. I don't know, it's a possibility, because I think it's an important, I don't want to have my back to you. So part of the nature of conflict is that that's what happens when 2 people want something that's different and there's some opposing thoughts and views. And so one of the things I know with conflict is that the more that people can be seen and heard and make sure their ideas are seen and heard and valued, even if people don't agree on them, it's really important. Oftentimes in a conflict, there's something below the surface. It rarely is what people say they're in conflict about. There's usually some other value under, and we speak to each other in a surface language, and there's a lot more underneath it. So usually when I'm called in to deal with a conflict and do a mediation, which I do a lot, it's finding out what the bigger issue is underneath it and finding out what's important to people. So don't assume that what people tell you is the conflict is the whole truth. It's one way of thinking about it, and the more that you can peel back and understand what's underneath it, and that's a place where oftentimes, just like when you were in disagreement but in rapport, oftentimes when I peel it back, people will look at each other and go, oh, well, we actually want the same thing at some level. Like we both want this to be really successful. It's just that you think we ought to go north and I think we ought to go south. So, as a team leader, naming the conflict, getting some help from somebody who knows how to deal with conflict, understanding the positive intention of conflict. The fact that you're this upset and the fact that you're this upset tells me something, which is this is really important to you and it's really important to you. So let's accept a couple things. One is this is really important, or you wouldn't be in this conversation. Have a couple ground rules. If we're going to deal with this conflict openly, we're going to be respectful. We're going to use I statements. There's a whole piece here on straight talk and straight communication I'd hope to get to. You did X, here was my perception of that and the impact it had on me, and here's the request. So staying out of blame. Usually when there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of blame. You always, you never, as opposed to here's the impact it had on me, which people can't argue with. Yeah. So naming it, and also not always seeing conflict as bad or as the enemy. There's a lot of naming it, like the elephant in the room. There's some real conflict in the room right now. 4 or 5 people really want to do the project this semester, and 4 or 5 are saying, no, we have to wait till next semester. So let's figure out, what's underneath that. What would happen for us if we did it this semester? What's the downside of doing it this semester? What would happen if we waited till next semester? What's the downside of that? Keep focusing on the issues, not the people. Make sense? Yeah, I know it's a short answer for, yeah. Other quick questions?
I just get this question a lot from social ventures, and I've heard it from a few of you as well, is around building a team. So what makes up a good team
Yes.
when you recruit others on your team,
Yeah.
especially for a social venture, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Are some of you struggling with that? Yeah, how to recruit, or who to recruit, and what makes for a good team. I would take some of this with you and to think about people who can kind of play at this level, and also look for diversity, okay? And it's a little hard because you're sitting around with a good friend and they go, oh, I want to be a part of that, I want to be, oh, come on. There's a little bit of the more the merrier, but really bringing discerning eyes, saying, you know what, we have 3 really big visionary people. Do some of you know the Disney strategy for creativity? So I have all the slides on it, but in Disney, and how Disney was created is that they have a creative, the dreaming room. Do you know? You probably know all this, but so you go into the dreaming room and you dream big, wild, crazy dreams, and then after you've spent like days in there, you then go into the realist room and you put on a realist hat and you kind of go, okay, let's take all the stuff we've been dreaming about and be realistic. And then the third and final room that you go into is the critics room. And you go in and you really tear apart like why things wouldn't work and what would be. And you need all three of those to get your idea to market, right? And so it's not just enough to imagine a great idea. So to look at the makeup of your team and say, you know what, we've already got, all 5 of us are great big idea people. But we don't, you know, we need somebody who's much more realistic, you know, and so to figure out how do people think and who would add some value. Think about, really sit down and take a careful look. Here's what we need. We need somebody who's more nuts and bolts. We need somebody who's got a lot of finance experience because we're moving into a stage of like dealing with money stuff. So, and being able to say to a friend, I'd love to have your ideas, but right now I need these 2 skill sets, right? Or we're a bunch of visuals. I need some kinesthetic people on this because the product is more kinesthetic. So starting to, but to do it thoughtfully. Who's on my team? And if I had 3 or 4 open chairs, what would be and talk about it with the other people that are on your team now. What are our strengths as a team right now? And what are we missing? It would be great to have a finance person. We need somebody who's got connections. We've got somebody who's whatever. And be real thoughtful and go, okay, so now let's brainstorm. Who could fill this chair? Who do we know that's really good with finances? Because you're right, coming into the next year, we're gonna need somebody with that. And be real thoughtful and model that with your team. We're not just gonna take on anybody who will pile on, at least for a core team, you know? And then if you've got great idea people, maybe break into sub-teams. You know, we've got a sub-team that's gonna meet separately about some big ideas, but we're gonna meet, you know. Does that help, Matilda? Yeah, and there's probably more there too. But again, to just, yeah, that is probably another whole workshop. But again, the idea is to be thoughtful and be intentional about how you do that. Okay.